I think the war in Ukraine is a sort of an eclipse, a very dark phenomenon that gives us the opportunity to see something very clearly. And this is something that needs to be seen in certain quarters, in certain regions, by certain people that by and large are good people but are confused about a very fundamental principle. And the principle is simply this: the law is not subordinate to tradition, tradition is subordinate to the law. The law is not subordinate to virtue, virtue is subordinate to the law. And the pursuit of tradition and the pursuit of virtue outside the boundaries of the law are nothing but shining vices. There is no merit in the pursuit of tradition and the pursuit of virtue in the breach of the law. On the contrary, it's a higher form of demerit. Now, this is something that I think this is something that's difficult to see in certain intellectual quarters. It's difficult to see for because let's say let me trace a bit of a very off the cuff intellectual backstory here. I will name a few figures that a lot of good people find important and insightful: Wittgenstein, Oakeshott, Alistair McIntyre. These three persons, in their own way, maybe we can add Charles Taylor also there. Uh, these three persons, four persons, each in their own way, we could say Charles Taylor is a liberal, Oakeshott is sort of a conservative, Wittgenstein, who have any idea what he was politically, probably a Stalinist, McIntyre, some sort of crypto communist. All of these people, they are read with justified love and attention by people who want to make sense of the world, myself included, because the message they give you, is the importance of tradition for ethical thinking. They say, well, unless you insert yourself in a certain tradition, you will not have the right coordinates, you will not understand the natures of the problems that are in front of you, and you will not be able to judge them correctly. And these four authors, or if you count Taylor in, they are fantastic, they're brilliant, but it's quite possible to read the message from them. No, that then you have this mere legality that is subordinate to tradition and virtue. This is also the type of thinking that has come through in the reception of virtue ethics. One of the big important stories in ethical thought in the 20th century was the revival of the ethics of the virtues. Then you have people like Elizabeth Anscombe, Peter Geach, Philippa Foot, and then later down the road, people like Martin Nussbaum, giving some sort of virtue or Rosalind Hursthouse, giving some sort of virtue oriented view of good conduct. And then that lies in continuity a little bit with this idea that what is a virtue? Well, it's virtue as opposed to outcomes and rules is something that you understand from within participation in a certain community. That's traditional, and all these linkages. And I think in general, no, this this way of looking at the world, uh, it, it it pretty much has that severe flaw, or the flaw that the rules of justice, they are simply, put under the rug. You have the virtues, and let's, rather than say that something is wrong, let's say it's unchaste or ungenerous or some other adjective of that sort. And then the curious thing about this whole view is that in that particular sense of the view, it was deeply rejected by, I think, the movement's fundamental author, and also the movement's most brilliant author, was Elizabeth Anscombe. Elizabeth Anscombe, yes, with some degree, she lauded return to the virtues, but on the other hand, she drew a line on the sand. They said, well, yes, we can return on the virtues, but there's a line of the sand that you can never cross. No, you can never kill the innocent. You can never justify killing the innocent. If you make killing the innocent a means to your aims, well, then you're a murderer. And nothing else, absolutely nothing else, counts for erasing that. And then in the reception of all this traditionalism and all this virtue talk, that sort of idea got lost completely. That was, let's say, the unappealing part of Anscombe. The rest, you could put it into this sort of holistic, that's another word people like to use nowadays, holistic, traditionalistic, organic, community driven point of view. And then you could just sort of forget about that line in the sand, and forget about the precept of justice, which is sort of very hard to work with. And I think right now we can see a little bit. Theoretically, very few people have raised this point, but I think now we can see practically what this means. Because in its best interpretation, I am not saying, that the Russian offensive is 100% legit. I don't know that. But let's say that in its best interpretation, it does manifest this idea of tradition, of woven into the land and the people, traditional virtues and so forth. And you know what? Without justice, it's it's not even good. Without justice, it's bad in proportion, or rather, it's evil, uh, pretty much in the same proportion that it pretends to be good. It's shining vices, and of course this is and I think essentially, a lot of the people that have been nurtured into the traditionalism of authors like the ones I've mentioned, and as I emphasize, in very different, let's say, lines of the left right political spectrum. Wittgenstein possibly a Stalinist, McIntyre a sort of crypto communist, Charles Taylor a liberal, Oakeshott both a liberal and a conservative. Or you could put also put other people there. You might want to put even people like Stanley Fisher, Richard Rorty, but they have a different line of thought, but they're also about all this being embedded in sort of this culture and tradition, and I think essentially what you see here is that this sort of flabby holism, I'm gonna say to call it that at this point, has not addressed this enormous blind spot that one of the founders of the virtue ethics movement put front and center. And I think we can see it, and we can see what it means, and we have to make a choice. Is it a matter of embedding in traditions and so forth, or do we dare talk once more about justice?